Hey everyone, welcome to this deep dive. We are going to be cracking open a single book today. It's called Black Morocco, A History of Slavery, Race, and Islam
Okay.
by Chouki El Hamel.
Right.
And, we don't often think about the history of Black Moroccans or even slavery, within an Islamic context.
Right.
And this book really, dives right into that and all the complexities of race and religion that go along with it. Really eye-opening stuff.
Yeah, no, you hit the nail on the head. This is a topic that has been, I think, really kind of brushed aside, shall we say? And
Yeah.
El Hamel really does a service, I think, by really tackling this. And he doesn't shy away from the tough questions like, the persistence of slavery in Africa long after the transatlantic slave trade. In fact, he opens with this kind of jarring story, a personal encounter he had in Mauritania. I think it was back in the 90s.
Yeah.
That really drives home how entrenched the practice and legacy of slavery still is for many people.
Yeah, that's what I thought was so powerful about it, too. We have this tendency to think of slavery as a thing of the past, right?
Right.
But he throws you right into this reality that it's not some distant historical event,
Yeah.
for everyone.
Right.
And then he takes it a step further by, not just telling us about slavery within Islamic societies, but he goes into the Islamic texts themselves, the Quran, the Hadith, the legal interpretations, to really kind of unpack how the practice was justified within that framework.
Right. And that's where it gets really, challenging and thought-provoking because, the Quran emphasizes social justice, right?
Right.
So how do you reconcile that with, later interpretations that allowed for things like concubinage?
Right.
It makes you really kind of question how, cultural practices and power structures influence even religious understanding
Right.
and how that changes over time.
Yeah. It's a point he really drives home, too, with this term, al-walad, which refers to a slave who is also the mother of her master's child.
And here's the catch. So Islamic law stated that she would gain her freedom, but only upon her master's death.
Only when he died. What does that say about how her life was valued, like as opposed to the child?
Exactly. It really makes you question, the very nature of freedom in that context, right? Was she seen as a person with, her own rights and agency, or was she seen as an extension of the master? Her value tied to her ability to produce heirs. It gets to the heart of how, social, religious, even economic systems were all kind of, interconnected.
You can't just neatly separate these things into boxes.
Exactly.
It's all tangled together. And speaking of tangled, El Hamel goes even further back.
Okay.
He digs into the roots of these ideas, and he dissects something called the Hamitic myth. I don't know if you've ever heard of that.
I have, yeah.
It's that, biblical story about Noah cursing his son Ham,
Right.
who supposedly becomes the ancestor of black people.
Right.
And, a lot of people think of this myth as a purely Christian or Western idea.
Right.
But here's where it gets interesting.
Okay.
El Hamel shows how this myth wasn't confined to one religion or one culture. It actually seeped into Islamic scholarship as well.
Okay.
And it had a huge impact on how black Africans were viewed and
Yeah.
treated. This wasn't just some fringe belief. This was woven into the fabric of intellectual thought.
Right.
And it was used to justify the enslavement of entire groups of people.
Yeah, it's amazing and disturbing how an idea can transcend borders and time periods like that.
Right.
And shape perceptions for centuries.
Exactly. So when we're talking about black Moroccans, who are we actually talking about?
Yeah, that's a crucial question because it wasn't some kind of monolithic group. El Hamel highlights this really diverse tapestry of origins,
Okay.
ranging from those caught up in the trans-Saharan slave trade to groups like the Nawa, who came later and have this incredibly rich and, kind of distinct cultural heritage.
Even the language we use reflects this complexity. I mean, take the term Hartani, which is often used to describe black Moroccans.
And even its etymology is a bit of a mystery because you have some scholars who link it to the Arabic word for freed, indicating, a connection to former slaves. But then you have others who connect it to the word for cultivate, emphasizing their role in agriculture, particularly in southern Morocco.
So you have this blurring of lines.
Exactly.
It's not always clear cut,
Right.
which I guess speaks to how fluid social status could be, historically speaking, right?
Yep, absolutely. And it's something that continues to spark debate even today.
I bet.
How do you define Black Moroccan? Who gets to decide? These are questions about identity belonging that are very much rooted in this complex history that El Hamel unravels.
Okay, but let's go back to the Nawa for a second.
Okay.
Because I have to admit, I didn't know much about them before this book. It's incredible how they managed to not only survive, but thrive after being forcibly displaced,
Right.
preserving their heritage through music and rituals. Like, it's amazing.
Yeah. It's a testament to the power of culture, wouldn't you say?
Yeah.
Even within systems of oppression, that sense of identity, of connection to something larger than yourself can be this incredible source of strength and resilience. And for the Nawa, their music and rituals were a way to maintain that vital link to their past, to their ancestors, even in this new and often hostile environment. It's really remarkable. And, it wasn't just about like holding on to the past, right? It was about adapting and evolving. The Nawa, they blended their traditions with elements of Islamic practice, creating this fascinating kind of cultural hybridity. El Hamel even points out how some of their chants still contain like linguistic echoes of West Africa, even if the original meanings have been lost over time.
It's like these whispers of history embedded in the music.
Exactly. That's so cool.
Yeah, and it's like they created this space for themselves within a system that tried to erase them,
Right.
And they did it while still honoring their roots.
Yeah, and I love that part about how they revere Bilal, one of the Prophet Muhammad's closest companions who was also of African origin.
Right.
And they see this connection to him. And, emphasizing that they were early converts to Islam.
Right.
Even before, the Prophet's own tribe.
It's a subtle but powerful form of resistance, isn't it?
It is, yeah.
They're challenging that narrative of just, slave origin, asserting their place within the Islamic community, reclaiming their agency, redefining their identity on their own terms.
It reminds you that Islamic history isn't this, monolithic thing. It's a tapestry,
woven from many, many different threads, including the experiences of Black Muslims, which have often been marginalized or silenced.
Exactly. And you can see that complexity reflected in their rituals too, right?
Oh, yeah.
I mean, the Nawa, they're known for these trance ceremonies, which involve, music and dance and elaborate costumes. It's this whole sensory experience.
Yeah.
And these ceremonies, they're often seen as, as a way of healing, of confronting trauma, both personal and collective.
Yeah, it's like they're tapping into this deep well of ancestral memory, right? Using these rituals to connect with the past, to make sense of their present.
Absolutely.
And maybe even find some kind of wholeness.
There's this rawness to it, this profound sense of both pain and resilience, in their music. It's not just entertainment.
Right.
It's a way of processing their history, their displacement, their longing for this, lost homeland.
It makes me think about American blues.
Right.
The spirituals that were sung by enslaved people in the South. And, it's like this universal language of suffering and hope.
Right.
And it finds expression through music.
Absolutely.
And rhythm, no matter where you are in the world.
It's the power of music, isn't it?
Yeah.
It transcends language, borders, even time.
It really does.
And just like those spirituals, Nawa music became this form of communication.
Right.
A way of sharing their stories, their struggles, their dreams for a better future.
Speaking of stories, El Hamel makes this really interesting comparison between the Gnawa and the griots of West Africa.
Oh, yeah.
Those traditional storytellers.
They're the musicians.
The musicians, the keepers of history,
Right.
Yeah.
It's a brilliant analogy.
Yeah, it is.
Because both the griots and the Nawa musicians, they played this vital role in preserving and transmitting cultural knowledge, making sure that those stories, those traditions weren't lost.
Right.
That they were passed down through generations.
It's like they're weaving this tapestry of memory, right?
Yes.
Stitching together these fragments of the past to create this sense of continuity.
Exactly.
Of belonging.
And that act of storytelling, of bearing witness to the past, is so essential, not just for understanding history, but for shaping the present and the future. It's a way of saying, we were here. Yeah. This is our story.
This is our story, yeah.
And these stories often challenge those official narratives too, right?
Exactly.
The ones written by the victors.
Right.
The powerful.
Exactly, yeah. And that brings us to another really fascinating part of El Hamel's book.
Okay.
His exploration of Sultan Malay Ismaili
Right.
and the Black Army.
Okay.
Ismaili, as you might recall, was this incredibly powerful ruler who consolidated his power in part by creating this formidable army that was made up mostly of black soldiers.
Right. And on the surface, you might think, okay, this is a sign of progress.
Right. Yeah.
Black Moroccans are, gaining power. But El Hamel kind of paints a much more complicated picture.
Okay.
Right?
Okay.
While Ismail clearly recognized the military prowess
Right.
of black soldiers, he also used religion to justify his control over them.
Interesting.
Claiming that they were predisposed to servitude because of their quote-unquote heathen past, despite their conversion to Islam.
It's like this really unsettling mix of empowerment and exploitation.
Isn't it?
Yeah, it really is.
It makes you question the true nature of Ismail's intentions.
Right. Yeah.
Right. Did he see black Moroccans as truly equal?
Right.
Or were they just pawns in his game of power?
It's a question that lingers even today.
Absolutely. And it gets to the heart of how power operates, right?
Yeah.
How even those who seem to be challenging the status quo
Right.
can still perpetuate systems of oppression.
It's a reminder to always look beyond the surface.
Exactly.
Right. To really question the motives
Yeah.
behind even seemingly progressive actions.
Yes, and to consider the human cost of those actions.
No, absolutely. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
And Hamel does such a brilliant job
He does.
of bringing that human dimension to the forefront.
Yes.
He digs into these archival records, including, slave registers, to try to piece together the lives of the soldiers who made up this black army, their stories, their lineages.
Those records are like a window into these individual experiences.
Aren't they?
Yeah.
Of those who were caught within this system.
Yeah.
The hopes, the dreams, the tragedies that unfolded.
Yeah, and they remind us that history isn't just about kings and battles.
Right. It's about real people.
It's about the real people who lived and died within those systems. El Hamel, he uncovers this one document.
Okay.
It's a census called Jenny Al-Azhar wa Nur al-Abhar, which is just chilling when you read it.
Yeah.
Because it's this meticulously detailed accounting of over 220,000 black Moroccans who were conscripted into the army. It lists their ages, origins, even like physical descriptions.
Right. It's like he was creating a human inventory.
It's exactly what it is.
Yeah. And that's, I think, what makes El Hamel's work so important.
Yeah.
He refuses to let these individuals be reduced to mere statistics.
Right.
He forces us to confront the human cost of these grand narratives, the individual lives that were shaped and often shattered by Ismail's ambitions.
Right. And he brings those lives into focus by going through these slave registers and highlighting the stories, the family connections, the heartbreak.
Absolutely.
Like that detail you mentioned earlier, the register entry, where he notes where multiple generations of a family died. Finarique.
In slavery.
It's devastating.
It speaks to the enduring legacy of slavery, right? The generational trauma that continues to haunt Moroccan society.
And it underscores the importance of remembering those stories.
Yes.
Right. Of honoring the lives that were lost, of acknowledging the injustices that were committed.
Absolutely.
Because those stories have power.
They do.
They force us to confront the past, to grapple with its complexities, and to work towards a different kind of future. One where those injustices aren't repeated.
Exactly.
But to get there, we have to understand how that system of slavery actually unraveled.
Right.
And that's where El Hamel takes us next.
Okay.
The abolition of slavery in Morocco and its really complex aftermath.
It's a crucial part of the story.
Yeah.
Because, it wasn't some clean break.
Right.
Some sudden realization that, slavery is wrong, let's just stop.
Right.
El Hamel shows us that it was this gradual process shaped by a mix of internal pressures and external forces.
So we're talking about a society trying to figure out how to dismantle this system that's been around for centuries.
Right, exactly.
It makes you wonder, what were the driving forces behind this shift?
Well, El Hamel points to a couple of key factors.
Yeah.
Internally, you had, movements within Morocco itself
Okay.
advocating for abolition, pushing back against, the moral and social costs of slavery.
Right.
But then there's no denying the role of external pressures as well.
Right.
The growing influence of European abolitionist ideas, even with their own complexity.
Right.
And hypocrisies, it played a part in kind of shifting the conversation on a global scale.
Right. It's like this perfect storm. Right.
Yeah.
Internal and external pressures all coming together to force change.
Exactly.
Here's what I find so fascinating. El Hamel, he makes it clear that even after slavery was officially abolished, in Morocco, its legacy didn't just disappear overnight.
Right.
It's like this ghost of the system lingered, and it continued to shape Moroccan society in all sorts of ways.
It's the difference between law and culture, right?
Oh, right.
Just because you outlaw a practice doesn't mean you've erased the attitudes, the beliefs, the, deeply ingrained social hierarchies that allowed it to thrive in the first place.
So even if it's not codified in law anymore, those prejudices, those power imbalances, they can still persist.
Absolutely. And El Hamel gives some, really compelling examples of this.
Okay.
For instance, he talks about how even some of the Moroccans who advocated for abolition,
Right.
while acting with, what we can assume were good intentions, still clung to, really prejudiced views about Black Moroccans. And it just shows that progress isn't always this straight line.
Right.
Even those fighting for justice can be blind to their own biases.
It makes you think about how we often talk about history in these neat little boxes, right? Like these periods of good versus evil.
Right.
But the reality is always messier than that.
Absolutely. And it highlights the importance of what we call intersectionality.
Yeah.
This idea of understanding how different forms of oppression can overlap and reinforce each other,
Right.
So even as you have, the movement against slavery, gaining momentum,
Right.
discrimination based on race, class, gender, all these factors continued to shape, Moroccan society.
It's like peeling back the layers of an onion.
Right. Yeah.
You think you've gotten to the core of the issue, and there's always more to uncover.
El Hamel, he brings up this really striking example from the late 19th century.
Okay.
He talks about how, European travelers, even those who were, critical of slavery, would still write about Black Moroccans in incredibly demeaning ways.
Wow.
They'd use this language of inferiority, savagery, reinforcing these racist stereotypes that were already so pervasive.
It's a good reminder that even those who, consider themselves enlightened or progressive can still be really complicit in upholding these systems of oppression.
Absolutely. And it underscores that abolishing slavery wasn't just about ending, a specific practice. It was about dismantling an entire worldview, a way of thinking about race and human difference that had taken root over centuries.
And maybe that's the most important takeaway from El Hamel's work, right? It's not just a history lesson, it's a call to action.
It is.
For all of us, no matter where we are in the world, to confront those legacies of slavery, of racism, acknowledge their ongoing impact, and to actively work towards creating a more just and equitable society.
Because as El Hamel so powerfully demonstrates, the past is never truly past.
Right.
Those historical injustices, they continue to reverberate in the present. They shape our world in ways that we might not even realize.
Black Morocco is a powerful reminder.
It is.
That the fight for equality is a continuous journey.
Absolutely.
It requires constant vigilance.
Yes.
A willingness to challenge those ingrained biases that can still linger even in our own hearts and minds.
Yes.
And it demands that we listen to those voices that have been silenced for far too long.
Absolutely.
Amplify their stories and work together to build a better future.
It's about recognizing the interconnectedness of our shared human experience, acknowledging the ways our histories are intertwined and understanding that the fight for justice anywhere is a fight for justice everywhere.
El Hamel's book doesn't give us all the answers.
Right.
But it does something even more important, I think.
What's that?
It challenges us to keep asking those tough questions, to keep pushing for a better world.
And that's what a good deep dive should do.
Exactly.
Right. Leave you with more to think about, more to explore.
More to explore.
More to act upon.
Yes, absolutely. And Black Morocco does that in spades.
It does.
It's a book everyone should read.
It is a story everyone should know.
Well, thank you for joining us on this deep dive.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
We hope it sparked some new insights, inspire you to keep learning.
Absolutely.
Until next time.